Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to Education Matters with Jim O'Connell. Very happy to have you on board for another episode here. I guess there's a lot going on. I know there's a lot going on in education circles in the city. But we've just come off of a primary, and I'm very pleased to have one of the candidates with me tonight, who I'll introduce in a second. As you know, the call-in number here is 640-3091. If you're watching on Tuesday night, the 18th, you're watching us live at 6 p.m. from 6 to 7 p.m. And you're very welcome to call in on 640-3091. Also, just a couple of little announcements as we're here tonight. There's a program called Manchester Welcoming Week is on, and it actually starts tonight with the first of these sessions is on. It started at 5:30 at Jupiter Hall. It's the kick-off party for Manchester's Welcoming Week, and the idea behind this is it's an opportunity for immigrants and refugees and people from out of town or out of state or different communities to come together and demonstrate the fact that we have strength in our diversity. And there's Citizenship Day is going to be tomorrow at 5:30 out at SNU. There's a community night at the Courier Gallery on Thursday night at 5 p.m. Friday night is the Story of Us Live, which will be at Jupiter Hall at 6:30. And on Saturday, it's Children's Story Time at the Bookery, the wonderful Bookery on Elm Street in Manchester. And then there is a date out there'll be a History of Immigration in New Hampshire photo exhibit that will be on in October at the library. So, and just from my soccer friends out there, Manchester North Soccer League, if you have kids in that league, all the games are cancelled tonight because of field conditions. And I know that practices in the city were cancelled as well because of field conditions. So if I don't know if everything is cancelled, but I think there's a good bet that most things are. So if you're getting kids dressed and ready and rushing to eat the spaghetti, perhaps you should check to see if everything's still going on. So thank you for your patience. With me is Gray Chynoweth, who's the successful candidate to run for the Executive Council for the state of New Hampshire. Hi, Gray. Welcome.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
You're very, very welcome. You know, Executive Council is one of those things. I guess if we were ever cornered and had to explain or try to give the definition of what a senator does or what the governor does or what a congressman does, you know, we'd take a stab at it and we'd be half correct, you know, and. But Executive Council is a sort of uniquely, as you know, a New Hampshire thing. So I'd like to do two things, I guess. If you could introduce yourself to folks first, just let them know, you know, where you are, where you come from, and who you are, and then perhaps take a breath, and then we'll talk about the Executive Council position.
Sure, that's great. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, and I couldn't agree more with the name of the show. Education does matter.
Right.
Certainly mattered for me, and actually, it's instructive in my background and upbringing and why I even considered trying to put my name forward to serve the public in this way. But so background on me, I was born to a home in Manchester. Grew up for first 2 months of life, lived on Dave Street, which is up by McIntyre.
Oh, yeah.
And then moved up to Canterbury, which is just, exit 18 up in 93.
Right. Beautiful part of the world.
Beautiful part of the world.
Yep.
And so, grew up there, and then ultimately, kind of started the end of my career. Now I currently work with Dean Kamen down in the Mill Yard on the Advanced Regenerative Manufacturing Institute, which is trying to do
very exciting.
Yeah, really exciting. Actually, a lot of education collaborations with UNH and community colleges and even down to high schools, including organizations like C and things like that.
Right.
So that's what I do now. Before that, I was a software executive at a couple companies that people might have heard of before, Dyn,
right.
Which is
now Oracle, of course.
Now Oracle, and growing as Oracle, which I was thrilled to see at. And before that, I was at the very beginning of my career, I was a lawyer at Sheehan Finney Bass and Green.
Oh, right.
But so I grew up in Canterbury, and one of the stories there. So I went to Canterbury Elementary. And then I went to Belmont High School for 2 years. I went to Belmont Junior High and then Belmont High School for 2 years. But pretty quickly, 2 years there, and then I ended up finishing at Bishop Brady in Concord. which was a great experience.
Yeah.
But
I know the principal there actually, and that's a good
It's a
school.
great school.
I like that school. I've been through it many times.
Yeah, great school, and I had a great experience there. But the reason I left Belmont and went to Bishop Brady was because in my sophomore year, my dad got he got a letter from the people that do accreditation for schools in New England, and what it said was that, hey, you guys haven't built a school in 50 years, and to Shaker Regional School District, and it said that because of that, we're putting you on notice that you don't have the facilities in order to teach kids, and we might revoke your accreditation.
Wow.
Which, of course, that's a big deal because if you
absolutely.
don't have accreditation as a high school,
Right.
you can't use that diploma to get into college. And my dad wanted me to have that opportunity if it made sense. So he ended up, say, hey, we're going to take you out and we're going to send you to Bishop Brady.
Right.
But unlike what we've seen in the state recently, where when we found school districts that were having challenges, we said, hey, let's take our money out, let's lean back, let's try to figure out different ways to remove investment in public education. My dad didn't decide to do that. My dad decided to invest his own time.
Right.
So he got involved. He was on the school board as soon as I had left. And by the time my younger brother, who was 15 years younger than I am, by the time that he got to high school, it was winning awards. They'd built a new school, brought in new administrative staff. And I think that's the kind of, that's New Hampshire at its best, right? People, citizens getting involved, making an impact. And I think that's, unfortunately, not something that we've seen really people get excited behind and get behind up in Concord, right? With the whole voucher bill and the toxic environment that seems to be festering inside of the Department of Education with all the Facebook posts and all that stuff that we heard a few months ago out of their spokesperson.
Yes.
I think that we need to have a positive vision for how education brings us together in the state. And I think we need to be looking at how we can improve it and invest in our kids and make that more successful, not figure out ways to siphon money out of it for people that are unaccountable.
And so you're singing to the choir here, because it seems to me when I don't believe in sort of personality politics, either following personalities for the sake of personality and sort of deifying them, or on the other hand vilifying people because you don't agree with them, right? So. But in the case of the choice of Mr. Edelblut for the Commissioner for Education, I'm sure he's a nice guy. I'm not. This is not. But it's his. This is not about that. And I mean that. I'm sure he's a nice guy. I've never heard anything about him other than that he's a nice person, the father of, I think, 7 kids or something. But having said all of that, it clearly is the case that he knows nothing about public education. So to choose somebody, even if he's a nice guy, but he has no qualifications.
Well, this is the way that I say it. So I'm good friends with Chris Pappas.
Yeah.
But just because I love his chicken fingers, does not mean that he should hire me to be the chef at the back room.
Right. Absolutely.
Just because and I respect Commissioner Edelblut's decision to homeschool his kids.
Yes, I do too.
But that does not give you the experience necessary to be running an important and complex organization. You got to have some. Whenever I hired in the private sector, I looked at 3 things. Do they have the fire in the belly, right, to make an impact? Are they smart enough to look at the data and brave enough to make change? Right. So I'm not sure that he fails on either of those 2 counts. Yeah. But I know for sure the last count, which is, do you have experience that'll make you likely to succeed in the position? You just got to look at that background and say, on its face, you got to have some experience with the institution, and I believe in bringing innovation to institutions. But what about his background really drove that? And I think you really got to question that, and that's why I wouldn't have supported his nomination. And I think, especially once we've seen some of the decisions that they've made and some of the culture that's clearly there, we could ask some hard questions.
Yeah, there's some of the stuff that's going on in the rulemaking in the state Department of Education under Mr. Edelblut, and with Drew Klein as the chairman of the State Education Committee, and there's a sort of a single worldview coming through from there, is that they're not big fans of public education to begin with. Certainly, I think reform is wonderful. I think it's it's important to constantly be looking and saying, what are we doing well? What might we change? And those of us who love public education are saying this thing can't be touched and it must be as it always was, then that would be an error also. But when I consider it insidious that we have the kind of rulemaking that's going on. I don't want to bore people with the individual thing, but just the change of rules within the Department of Education about putting onerous requirements. The very people who talk about reducing requirements, reducing mandates that the government should get out of our way. And the Department of Education is pushing its agenda, an agenda of sort of pro-private schools, etc., through the rulemaking process, adding to the workload of districts across the state. But we might get down in the weeds a little bit about that, but if we go down that place too far. So education in the state of New Hampshire, let's just stop there for a second and we'll go back to it. Just to the issue about what the Executive Council does for those who are not paying attention and even for those of us who are.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So the Executive Council is a unique position in New Hampshire. There's only one other organization, one other state that has something like it, which is Massachusetts, as far as I know, and that really focuses on approving judges. This one, it votes on all contracts over $25,000, so it's really striking deals, right? Helping the state strike deals, and it's hiring folks. So it's commissioners and judges and all that kind of stuff, which happens here. You vote on that, and the last one is voting on the 10-year highway plan. And so it's really about infrastructure, it's about operations, and that's what I've done my entire career is focus on infrastructure and operations.
And then is it similar to, say, Congress's role in appointing judges, for instance, where it's, are you advising or are you deciding?
So the way it works, I was talking to someone yesterday who used to staff a former governor to the Executive Council. And what they told me is that at the end of the day, the governor really needs to only know one thing, and that's how to count to three. Right. So the governor has the ability to create an agenda, to propose nominees, but if the Executive Council, if 3 of the 5 don't vote in favor of that action, it doesn't happen.
Okay, there's no super majority or anything. It's a simple.
Yeah, it's 3 of 5
right.
to make it work.
Okay, I've seen some very impactful decisions. It's one of those things that it is actually carried on public education, public television in Manchester, where I don't know if all meetings are carried, but it must be many of them are, because it's quite often on public television where the meetings of the executive councils are carried there, and so. But for those of us interested in, you talked about infrastructure, for instance, the place where I've seen the biggest impact, and with the caveat that I haven't been paying attention to everything. I pay attention to a lot of things, but mostly to the ones that really interest me. And infrastructure, especially, the commuter issues, commuter rail, transportation, highways, bridges, those things are very important, the airport. And I've seen decisions made on that 3-2 boundary that have had detrimental effects, in my view, to the state.
Absolutely.
And oftentimes, and I remember the most, I would call it egregious, others might see it differently, but I remember many years ago, Ray Bazorek, who I happen to like, a good Manchester guy, but Ray was
loves the city.
Yes, loves the city, former mayor, but I disagree with him. This was a commuter rail issue, and when at the point of the original decision to widen I-93, there was, on a sort of an unheralded day, one mundane thing came onto the desk of the Executive Council, and it was to approve the addition of the environmental study of adding rail to the I-93 widening project. Yeah. And at one point, I thought it was $80,000 extra. It might have been $800,000 extra, probably $800,000. I just remember the 8 number, but it was a ridiculously small number as part of the whole project.
Yeah, it was hundreds of millions of dollars in the project.
So what it would have meant was that the environmental impact would have been done, and that would have allowed the decision to be deferred. Was going to be deferred later anyway, about whether to place rails up the centre of the new I-93.
Yeah. Yep.
And the vote came, and the Executive Council said no. And the moment that vote was passed, it foreclosed the possibility of a new railway line from the Massachusetts border to Manchester, because you would have to go back and reopen the whole thing and have a different process of environmental study. So all the bridges you have now built, all the all the river crossings, all the wetlands crossings would all have to be re-examined just for rail, and so it would be cost prohibitive. So that's the kind of stuff for people who are not paying attention, and rightfully so, because they have real work to do. There's a lot of important decisions go through that Executive Council.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the most important part, similar decision came down. They voted, they weren't in favor of accepting $4 million to do the engineering work to determine how much it would cost to put a bridge over the Merrimack to bring it up
on the
from
Merrimack
Lowell.
side. Yep.
And these are the same people. On the one hand, they say it's too expensive. On the other hand, they say they don't want to use this federal money to determine how much it costs.
Right.
So I just don't understand how that works.
Well, it reminds me, and let me understand. I think I'm correct in saying, because I didn't bother to actually check, and I shame on me, but I presume, or I'm guessing that Ted Gatsas is your opposing
Correct.
candidate,
Yep.
former mayor of Manchester, and Ted Gatsas is well known for his stance on commuter rail, and unless he's changed it, but this is I've heard him personally on many occasions. His stance was he's fine with commuter rail, which is okay, great, he's for commuter rail. Well, he's fine with it once some private company comes in and funds it. And of course, that's as good as saying I'm not for it. I mean, I'm for a space station in somewhere.
Well, and this is the part that's frustrating. I mean, that's such a political answer.
Right.
Right. It's
right.
such a political answer. I'm for it, but I'm against it.
Right.
Right. I mean, I think if you care about an issue, you think it's important, you figure out a way to get it done. I mean, no business that I've ever been in would somebody say, well, I had the deal, but then I lost it, right? It doesn't work that way.
Right.
I think the answer is if you believe that something should happen, you get innovative, you get the partners to the table, and you make it happen.
Right.
Right. So I think, you can't have excuses, right, for why something just, you kind of throw up your hands and say it won't happen, especially when there's actually a private developer who's down in Nashua who's looking at this.
Right.
Right. So what are we doing to actually collaborate with the private sector?
Right.
How are we making it easier for them to make that investment in our state?
Right.
And for me, that's what this is really about, right? It's about people that are going to go out, have new ideas, be willing to lean in, make those new ideas happen so that we can make the state even better than it is right now, right? To expand opportunity, to drive, economic expansion. Mm-hmm. Or is it going to be kind of, I'm for it, but I'm against it.
Right.
We've got to make a decision to drive positive progress at the state level, and that's one of the things I'm excited to do as an executive councilor.
I think, and it's kind of a simplification, perhaps, and maybe an oversimplification too. But there's sort of here in Manchester, there's sort of an old and a new Manchester. Now, and that I'm sort of witnessing from, looking at it as it's happening. I think because there's a part of Manchester that sees itself as the old mill town, mill city, and almost by inference, it has seen better days. Attitude, and I remember just one alderman who described himself as amazed that there was a development off of River Road or North Elm Street where the houses were selling for $800,000 each, and he's like throwing his arms up at in delight, really, but also in total amazement that you could sell a house for $800,000 in Manchester. Like, that should never be happening. And so that's sort of an indication. That doesn't make him a bad person. It just tells where his mindset is. He's still thinking of 1970s prices and ideas.
Well, and that for me is my view of Manchester. The stories that people tell of this city, too often I think, are the stories of failure. So we talk about the bankruptcy. Right, of the Amoskeag Manufacturing Company.
Which, of course, is ancient history.
Well, it's
right?
ancient history. But I want to talk more about who are the ambitious, bright, young entrepreneurs that moved to this city and said, you know what, I see a river, and on top of that river, I'm going to build the biggest textile manufacturing center in the world. That is an expansive view of the type of opportunity that is here. And that's what attracted thousands and thousands of smart entrepreneurs to build this city into what it is today.
Right.
And I like to focus on that because I think that's analogous to where we are now. Now we don't just have a river. Now we have, millions of square feet of amazing manufacturing space and office space in the mill yard that we can leverage to really grow this city, to really take advantage of that opportunity. And that's the part that I get excited about. That's why I moved here. That's why I recruit businesses here. That's why I love getting people to come and work here. Because I think that if we maintain that legacy, right, we can keep our values of hard work, innovation, that have always been here in Manchester. But if we pick our heads up and we look out at the opportunity that we have, it's really limitless. We are 50 miles away from the 7th most dynamic economy in the world. Right. How are we connecting ourselves better to that? How are we leveraging the talent, the investment opportunities that are coming? How are we leveraging that market? Right. And I think that's what people get excited about.
Well, this is sorry to go. This is the very idea, though, Gray, that you're preaching to the choir again, because for years we've heard this, and I'm not trying to be retro and looking back, because I think it has changed. Not just changing, it has changed. Manchester is demonstrably more vibrant than it was 10 or 20 years ago. So that's certainly going on. But for too long, the idea, we looked at in the commuter rail thing, there's actually as many people, I don't know if it's as many, but I think it's 45,000 people a day commute into New Hampshire.
Yeah.
So this idea
it's
that
a
we're
great place
here
to work.
that we're all heading south.
Well, the other funny thing that I hear about rail is that I hear some people say, but if we build rail, then people will be able to commute into Boston.
Right.
And I said to myself, do you not recognize that we have a big road that already goes into Boston?
Right.
Right. I mean, this is about, you could imagine people saying the same thing about being against Building 93. It's expensive.
Right.
It'll take people away from our companies. Of course not. When you connect economies, everyone wins. Why? We are closer to Boston than San Jose is to San Francisco. Right? And we've got to take advantage of that. And that's going to make New Hampshire stronger. It's going to make Manchester stronger. And so I think, some people look at what's happening here and they see a glass half empty. I see a glass half full. I think there's opportunity here. And when we built Dine, when we were growing that from 15 people, everyone said, if you want to succeed, you can do that in San Francisco, you could do that in Boston, but you can't do that here in Manchester.
Right.
And our attitude was, of course we can do it in Manchester. Right? If it was good enough to build the biggest textile manufacturing center in the world, then why can't we build a software company?
Right. And when I was CEO of a technology company that was European funded, and at one point, when we were deciding where to locate it, now I was self-serving because I lived in the Greater Manchester. I lived in Manchester, so I'm thinking, Manchester should be the place. But of course, these were sophisticated investors with a lot of money, and that decision had to be justified. And so the equivalent of a white paper had to be written, give the reasons why. Why aren't we going to Kentucky or Alaska? Or, when they were sitting over in London, they're looking at the massive, United States, like, give me the reasons why it just happens to be on your doorstep. And so I admitted, of course, it was self-serving, but also it was fully defendable. We had all the things that a business needed. We were able to demonstrate that it was a very good decision.
We got a good climate. There's so much going for Manchester. And I think part of that is, this is one of the things I always talk about. I was just at a meeting, one of the organizations I helped found. So I helped found this organization called Manchester Young Professionals Network. And then I also found this organization called Stay Work Play, both of which are dedicated to recruiting and retaining the next generation of New Hampshire workers. We did a little retreat last week, and someone got up and said, well, people would go away and then come back. And I said, we have this weird, I call it pride deficit disorder. Right.
It's I like that.
Pride deficit disorder. It's people that are scared to be proud and optimistic about Manchester. And I understand, there's been a lot of disappointments in the city's history. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be optimistic and energetic in going about seizing the opportunities that are here today. And when we talk to our kids, when we talk to people about opportunity, we need to be proud. Bold enough to say, hey, you can build a world-class career. You can build a world-class company. Manchester and southern New Hampshire is where a ton of opportunity is. And you don't have to go away to do that. You can do that right here. And I think it's a focus, now with that idea comes a lot of effort, right? And I think you got to have someone who's willing to lean in, whether it was, leaning in to help create Stay Work Play and start getting people to shift their thinking, whether it's leaning into, Dine to help grow it, whether it's, working today to try to build a whole new manufacturing industry in the mill yard. I think we need people to get involved in civic life, like my dad did, that said, hey, we can make it better than it is today. And that comes with being energetic. It comes with being aggressive on how to bring people to the table and think about new ideas.
And the very thing
that's
raised,
exciting stuff.
It is exciting, but you have to have, you can't sort of make that up. You either have faith I mean, a lot of people give lip service to, oh, it's a wonderful state and the New Hampshire way and all that. But then, like the gentleman I mentioned earlier, sort of in the back of all that, there's sort of a hesitancy and, well, I don't know if we can, sort of an inferiority complex almost. And I look at the young people. I have 3 kids in college right now, and a senior, a sophomore, and a freshman. One is in state, 2 are out of state. I have a son who's at Central High School. So, I listen to them and and more, just as importantly, the kids they associate with. And, they're part of the real world. And so, they're a product of Manchester education system,
Yep.
et cetera. And they don't have the blinkers on. But they do see this sort of dichotomy, this pull drag that's going on between have we made our minds fully up to move forward with excitement and dynamism and let's go. And we see that on the education side. The reason why I spend time on education is because I believe that education's where the single most important piece.
Well, and this is why I'm so excited about and supporting things like Manchester Proud.
Wonderful,
Right.
great. We've
Wonderful
talked about it on here. Yeah.
And one of the things when I was speaking with Barry and Arthur when they came in to talk to me about helping support it, which I am, I talked about what happened to the idea that Manchester high schools could produce a student that could go into a business here in Manchester and help make that business money, right? Let's get to a place, and we have lots of building projects going on. I was just talking to folks who are building the SNHU garage. They're having a horrible time recruiting people.
Yep.
Right. So why can't we think about these Manchester schools as delivering, great, talented students into these jobs so that these businesses can make money here in Manchester?
Right.
And I think when you do that, when you get that talent connected right into that business, that's transformative. And I think this idea that you can only have kids that go to a 4-year degree and those are the only ones that are going to be able to help make businesses successful. I think that's just false. I know that's false because that's what we did at Silvertech, right? We worked with New Hampshire NHTI up in Concord, and we had kids come in, students come in. They interned for the second half of their second year. We figured out which ones were going to work. We started putting them on client projects in that summer, and then they would be able to finish out, if they wanted to, the next 2 years of their degree at UNH Manchester. But I think that there is opportunity here. We have the students. We have we are more diverse than any other place in the
Absolutely.
state, and that's a huge asset to us as we
Right.
look to attract and retain great talent from all around the world.
Right.
And I think these are the things that I see as proof points about the opportunity that's in Manchester. But I think we've got to be excited enough to take them on, and we've got to be energetic enough to say that we can do it here, and we shouldn't send our best and our brightest away to go do something else. We should have people succeed here in Manchester,
Right.
launch great careers, launch great businesses, and we've got to have a state government that understands that there's opportunity
Right.
to do that.
Well, we happen to live in a state which has suffered from the largest ever cut in public education 6 or 7 years ago, when Mr. Bill O'Brien was the leader of the House, and we cut massively UNH funding. The University System of New Hampshire. So today, University of New Hampshire, I have a son there, is the most expensive in-state university in the United States.
And my question is, how do we change this dynamic?
Right.
One of the things that I was excited to see was about the recent student loan forgiveness package that got passed.
Right.
Because I think that that helps target relief, and so kids can go and they can pay those, but then it gets relieved on the back end once they come in and really help drive
Right.
the New Hampshire economy. But I think it's about having new ideas. How are we going to align that set of investments with what we want to come out at the other end in terms of results?
Well, we have to value things, fully, and I'm here, preaching constantly the value of education, et cetera. And we have seen and we are seeing some exciting things around the sort of connection with business and colleges,
Absolutely.
et cetera. Moving beyond education for a minute, even though this is the Education Matter things before you depart, the area that you're going to represent or hope to represent for the Executive Council, it's Manchester, and what else?
Yeah, and I do have to leave in a minute or two.
Yeah.
So
I was thinking about 6:30ish.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
So I'll answer this question, and then
Okay.
I'll have to come back on to answer the rest of them.
Yeah.
But so this district, interesting district, it goes all the way from Lee and Barrington over kind of towards the seacoast, and they obviously think of themselves as part of the seacoast, up to Pittsfield, Loudoun, Concord, Chichester. I'm sorry, Pittsfield, Loudoun, Bow, kind of that think of themselves as related to Concord.
Right.
And then of course, you got down here, right, with Manchester, Londonderry, Bedford. So it's pretty diverse. Some of the towns are suburban. In and around Manchester and urban. Some of them, like you get up to Pittsfield, Pembroke, Epsom, they're rural towns, right? And so those are a lot like the ones that I grew up in Canterbury.
Right.
So it's a beautiful district. I visited all 19 towns this summer, so got to know them a little bit, all the way from the Londonderry Old Home Day Parade to the Pittsfield Balloon Festival, from ice cream in Bow to brownies in Barrington. I got to see a lot of the district. And it's got a diverse set of challenges. Okay.
So before we let you go then, you'll be following in the footsteps of the wonderful Chris Pappas.
I always say that. Yeah, I always say that. His feet don't look big, but he has big shoes to fill.
Good. I like that. So just to finish off, how can people contact you, get a hold of you? They want to support you, they want to volunteer for you. How's that done?
Yeah, so it's easy to do. You can go to graychynoweth.com. That's GRAYCHYNOWETH.com, or you could just head to my Facebook page, Gray4NH, and just look that up, and you get a hold of me, and I'll be excited to get to know you, see you out there on the streets as I hit the district, to talk about where we can go, the type of opportunity we have at the state level to drive innovation, to drive efficiency, and to make the state work better for everyone.
Great. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. I wish you well.
Thank you very much.
Keep up the fight, and we'll see you. We'll see you once the big day comes.
All right, thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. And I was butchering Gray's name earlier. I was calling him Chynoweth, and it's Chynoweth. So my apologies for that. But we'll see. It should be an interesting race because, of course, the other candidate in that race is former Mayor Ted Gatzis, and it's quite an interesting dynamic, I think, and a real decision for voters in Manchester. And I'll do it here. I'll put an invitation out. I'd love to have Mayor Gatzis on. Mayor, if you're listening, or if any of the people with you are and would like to come on, I'd be very happy to have you come and talk about your candidacy on education matters. But the good news is that it's Manchester versus Manchester. So Manchester geographically, people who are intimately involved in the city of Manchester and know the city of Manchester well, so it's a good position for Manchester to be in. I think that's important because in our public life, too often in other in some of the House seats, for instance, where or in the Senate, where our senator is shared between Hooksett and some of the wards in Manchester, and again Lichfield or Londonderry and some of the wards in Manchester, and so the voice of Manchester is diluted in that way. So that's just the way we choose districts. But in this case, we have two Manchester-based candidates, Gray Chynoweth and former Mayor Ted Gatzis, going head to head in that election. It should be very interesting to see how it pans out. But when you are going to the polls in November, I think it's important not to skip or underestimate the impact that the Executive Council can have. As I was saying earlier, there are every dollar, every contract over $25,000 must be approved by the Executive Council. And so when it comes to the things that the state might fund or the things that it might not fund, having the majority, that 3 minimum, in favour of doing it in the Executive Council is very important. And so I would urge you to pay attention to the Executive Council race. It is one of those races that, especially I think when we get into say the CD1 race, Congressional District 1 race, which will be a race that will have some national profile. this race for executive council might be lost. The other point I think is that I think Gray was a little modest in his in talking about his achievements. But for a young man, here's a guy who was already successfully been involved in a number of successful businesses and that have been very impactful to Manchester and to families living in Manchester, and he does, in my worldview, represent the new Manchester, the Manchester that is exciting and ready to move forward and ready to build new coalitions and find new ways of doing things, and that would be a refreshing thing to see. I think having people in Concord who are old or jaded or are limited in their thinking, and that's not going to make the state of New Hampshire and Manchester in particular the place that it can be and should be. So. Back to the local matters here in education. We have next Tuesday night will be the next Board of School Committee. The teachers in Manchester are still working away without a contract. I frankly don't understand what is going on here. I see and listen to debates going on social media. With what I would call the chattering class. It's usually the same 4 or 5 people who seem to be on every website that you can go to in the city, always agreeing with themselves in their echo chamber, and it's I don't know why these people don't have more self-awareness. If you sort of look around you and find the same 6 people are in the room all the time, I guess you're not converting anybody. But it seems to me that the contrast a week ago on Friday, when the incident happened, when there was a shooting incident on Hanover Street, which had the effect of causing Central High School, which was 2 blocks away, to have to go into shutdown. The contrast was bold and in stark relief right there, because we had teachers who had been in the school since 7 a.m. And administrators. Some of them, I know administrators who go to school at 6 a.m. Every day. And the fact that we had firefighters and police officers, and I'm a big fan of firefighters and police officers. The firefighters are waiting to learn from the city when they're going to get a cost of living increase. So the contrast was that you had teachers who were still working at 9 o'clock on Friday night. And, that was 15 hours after starting, 14 hours for some. Teachers came in and, volunteered to help. They came in from other schools. There were administrators from all across the city. It was a wonderful community event and showing the heart of the city and what it is that makes us create, people helping each other. But the contrast is that you have a teacher. The starting salary for a teacher in Manchester is $35,000. They top out at $70,000, or maybe it's $75,000. I have to go and look that up, but that's where it's at. No overtime, no additional pay, and the only additional pay you can get is if you do some coaching, or you can get a small stipend for coaching a team. It still is not it's not going to impact your family budget to any great degree. And then at the same time, you have police officers and other city employees who are there, and they're on time and a half or double time, and they've got all kinds of additional, so the amount of money per hour that a police, and this is not, I want to say again, I have great admiration for the members of the Manchester Police Department and the work that they do, and I have known lots of good friends of mine are and were in the Manchester Police Department. But this doesn't stop me from saying that if you have a police officer directing traffic outside Hillside School last Friday night week at 9 o'clock. And who's earning 2 to 3 times per hour what a teacher earned per hour for that day. And at that moment, in actual fact, the only people not being paid to stand there and work there on behalf of the city were the teachers. There's something wrong with that. So I think the people of the city need to pay attention. I usually say when it comes to teachers' pay and condition that, they're capable of speaking for themselves. Well, I think they do a lousy job of speaking for themselves, frankly, because they're not making enough noise. I was looking at a former school board member, Joe Briggs, who's been, it was a friend of mine, used to have a show on Manchester Public Television. At one time, before the Joe Kelly-Lavassa show was Joe and Will or something, many years ago, it was the Joe show, the Two Joe show, was it was Joe Briggs who started that show and then had Joe Lavassa follow him. But Joe, who lives down in Atlanta, was on social media today, and he lives in Gwinnett County, in the state of Atlanta, or in the state of Georgia, outside of Atlanta, and he was talking about the contrast between the schools there. In this case, he was talking a lot about the infrastructure, the age of the buildings, the quality of the tracks and fields, and the infrastructure there. But he and I exchanged a couple of thoughts, and so I went in and looked at Gwinnett County in Georgia, and last year the pay raise for teachers in the Gwinnett County area it came to a total of 3.86%. So contrast that to the city of Manchester at 1.6, 1.5. Perhaps somebody can point that out. But once again, that increase in the Georgia Gwinnett County area, which has got 180,000 students, so it's a large area. Part of that 3.85% was a 1% real time increase for teachers. So not alone did they get costs of living, inflation, to match inflation, etc., but every teacher, and by teacher in this case, that was every teacher, paraprofessional, everybody involved in teaching in that district, got a 1% increase across the board to bring their wages up in real time, and then they got cost of living on top of that, above whatever else they might have got on any other circumstance. I would also contrast the city of Manchester's position with an article in the Union Leader from a couple of days ago, when the city of Nashua was deciding what it would do with its surplus. And they're funding lots. There's a list there of lots of projects that are necessary and need to be done, obviously, that are going to be funded for schools and for the city because of a surplus of a few $1 million. And of course, the city of Nashua, for the last 2 years, its annual increase, while Manchester has been raising its revenues by 1.5% or 1.3% or whatever it is the tax cap will allow on any given day. I think the most recent was 1.6. Nashua has been raising its revenues by something around about twice what Manchester has, and they have the benefits of it. So at some point, the people of Manchester need to pay attention, see what's going on, and say, what is it that we are going to? Are we ready to actually do something? And when Gray was talking earlier about living in Belmont and they hadn't built a new school in 50 years, well, we're rapidly going down that road. The last school was built in 1992, I think it was, and so that's if I'm right in the 1992 number, we're 18 years into the century already, and 8 more from 1992 gets you 26 years. And we have no plan to, and I'm not saying the answer is to build schools. I'm saying this is just indicative of sort of the miasma across the whole, the investment in anything. Let me go and look at a couple of things that are going on. The superintendent had his first two coffee with the superintendent meetings in the city. The most recent one was last Thursday afternoon at Central High School. And I don't know whether to laugh or cry about the issue of how many people showed up for that. But it's a well-publicized opportunity to meet with the superintendent if you need. I think the good news is that there wasn't a crowd of 500 people there, and this is what I shared with the superintendent, was that, if people had been terribly unhappy about what had happened the previous Friday, this was only 6 days later, and had something untoward, something terrible or something bad happened, there would have been a lot of people shouting and screaming there. So that's the good news. The fact that the meeting with the superintendent at Central High School had three students at it, and there were, other than Mr. Vaccarezza, the principal, and a person from the administration, and the superintendent himself, the only parents that were there were two parents and a grandparent. And so the good news, I guess, is that people who didn't have major things to complain about, but I just find it an indication of apathy also, that we have a school district the way it is, and this is the response of people who, when they have an opportunity to speak out, to speak their minds. I know that to make it personal for a minute. So the school district is doing better than it did before in terms of class sizes. We still have the highest class sizes in the state of New Hampshire, but we've made some improvements, especially at the elementary school level. So that's a good thing. I'm waiting with bated breath to see the numbers for October 1st. So while we have made some improvements, in my son's case, he's a junior at Central High School, and now this is the second year that there isn't a class available for him to do his foreign language. So he is going to have to do it on VLAX. Now just think about this. Here's a kid growing up in Manchester who had no foreign languages in middle school that every other middle school in the state. When I say every, there might be one somewhere that doesn't do foreign languages. It's possible, maybe even likely, I don't know. But as good as every other middle school has a foreign language or more. We used to have a number of them. But we just brought back in a piecemeal manner last year Spanish into our middle schools, which isn't available for every kid, but at least it's available for some. But in my son's case, he goes through the Manchester public school system, has no foreign language for his 3 years in middle school. He has 1 year of foreign language as a freshman in high school. When he gets to his second year in high school, there's no availability in the roster or to fit in with his schedule, so he has to do his foreign language on VLAX. And then he turns into his third year in university, his junior year, and here we are in 2018 in September, and once again he doesn't have a foreign language because there's only one class offered and it doesn't fit in with his schedule. So he's back out to doing it on VLAX on his own again. So I think that's entirely unacceptable. I think parents should be aggrieved about it, and they should be taking action about it. Those who oppose public education and want to continue to keep their foot on the neck of public education, they continue to do so. They show up, they elect people, and they ensure that our school district doesn't manage to come up for air. And the rest of us need to stand up and fight these matters and say, enough is enough. We need something done about it. So I'm hoping that we hear something. The idea that the school district that there's no negotiation going on between teachers and the board of school committee. I have no secret sauce. I don't have the secrets for what's going on inside there. I asked, and I asked last week, and I was told that there were no negotiations, no discussions, no communication, and no plans for communication. So as a city, we're happy to see 1,200 of our employees. And oh, by the way, as was pointed out to me, I keep saying teachers. I use the word teachers sometimes for the broad spectrum of people working at the school district, because I know the paraprofessionals and the secretarial staff are in the same position. So it's not just, I mean, teachers. So basically, those working in our schools. I don't know what the people who work in the cafeteria and the janitorial staff. I don't know where they are with regard to their pay. But average salaries in the United States grew by 2.9% in the last 12 months. So that's the average. Now, you can imagine that so some people saw a much higher rise, but so all the people working at McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts and all the Burger King and Taco Bell and whatever other jobs they have, crossing guards and whatever people do for casual work, etc. They're part of that figure. So the people who have real jobs and who have a degree or a master's degree, who went to college, who are doing valuable work, teachers, doctors, attorneys, police officers, firemen and women, bus drivers, whatever the things are, scaffold, iron workers and electricians. Across those, so the increase was likely higher than 2.9% for those groups. But even given the average of 2.9%, that was what the average pay increase in the United States was. New Hampshire is the 6th richest state in the United States, and Manchester is its biggest city. It is amazing to me that this school board wants to go into negotiations, as I understand it, with the largest group of workers in the city, and does not want to talk about any pay increases. They want pay increases off the table. They want a blank sheet. They're not really to talk about that. So when you do this year over year, you see, as we are seeing, some great teachers and administrators and employees leaving this district for better opportunities elsewhere. And that is just a shameful place for us to be. And all the people I meet at the supermarket on a Saturday morning, or at a game on a Friday night, or walking down Elm Street on a Monday, who walk by me, who are residents of Manchester, how they, honestly, folks, I don't know why the connect isn't there. The connect can be there because we have an opportunity once every couple of years in particular to make a big change to our city, or to our state, and to our country for that matter. The decisions that are going to be made by we know that the House in Concord has been passing down costs to the cities. So they're adding more and more to the taxpayers and the local property owners in the cities and towns of New Hampshire, and they're doing that because you voted for them. This is what they're doing. It came up at the meeting in Derry, the town meeting in Derry last week, as was reported in the Union Leader, was talking about that the most recent reduction in contributions towards pensions that the state has passed down to the city of Derry is costing the city of Derry $400,000 and some per year. In Manchester, it's costing about $4 million per year. And we still have public representatives elected by the people of Manchester who go up into Concord, and when given the opportunity, they vote to take money away from Manchester public schools. They take money that would have come from elsewhere, or money that would have come in federally, or money that would have been from whatever source it might be, whether it's whatever, tobacco taxes or the tolling or whatever place you want, whatever it might be. They vote not to have that money come to Manchester, or to take the amount of money that Manchester currently gets and to reduce it. All as part of their heartfelt belief that or non-belief, I suppose, in public education, and that's why I'm constantly saying here we need to be paying attention. For those of you who are interested in volunteering in the Manchester School District, and especially those people involved in PTOs or PTAs or parent groups around the city, there's a renewed structure and effort around volunteering for the city of Manchester in its schools. And on the city, if you go on the city's school district's website, mansd.org, you can go on it there, and there's information for volunteers. The first training for volunteers is actually on, not surprisingly, I bet, at Parker Varney tomorrow night at 5:30. And but you should go on. You need to communicate with the school district. I don't know if there's an RSVP or not, but if you go on the city's website, you will see. That opportunity is there tomorrow night. Other parent groups, etc., in the city should take advantage of this and take note of this, and have people properly. Those people who are going to spend a significant amount of time with kids, or are going to volunteer on a regular basis, should go through a process of being approved by the city. This is in no way meant to stop people who show up to do bake sales or popcorn or accompany kids on outings and things like that. It's not for that, but for people who are volunteering in places where they have more direct contact with children, and perhaps in an unsupervised way. I don't want to finish tonight without giving a shout out to the kids who are doing the program for the construction trades program, which has just started for seventh graders at Parkside, and that's a wonderful. It's again, in a place where we see industry and business working alongside the school district to offer more opportunities for kids, and I'm all for that. I know that Jimmy LaHoo in particular has been deeply involved in that, so congratulations to everybody for the work being done there. We're down to the final few seconds here. I thank you again for paying attention. I thanks to Gray Chynoweth for being on tonight, and I look forward to seeing you in a week from now. Good night and all the best from Jim O'Connell.